So as you can see on my screen there, I've got a review assignment up for number 10, similar to what we did in the tutorial, but a lot simpler. Basically going to use the techniques that we learned in the tutorial there to go ahead and build a table and then populate that table with all the different event information that you see there, the date, the event, and the price. I guess that says, yeah, price. So we need to open up our Visual Studio and open up our CSIS 125A from the root. So as you can see, we're going to go ahead and open up these two files, the LHT events_txt.html and the LHT_table_txt.js file. We'll add our name and date in there and then rename each of those without the _txt. So here's our LT events. And down here is the LT table txt JavaScript file. Go ahead and put your name in there. Today's date. We'll do the file, save as, and remove the _txt. So we end up with just LHT_table.js for the JavaScript file. Now let's copy this, paste it into my HTML, and then save the HTML file using the same method. So file menu to save as, and then we'll change the file name or remove the _txt there. So it just reads LHT_events.html. And then save it. Now that we have those two files with their name and date and renamed, we want to go to step 2 in the LHT events HTML file. Directly above the closing head tag there, we want to insert links to the LHT list.js file and the LHT_table.js file. And I believe, yeah, both of those get deferred. So we want to put in the list first, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. That is the file that contains an array that has all of the information that we'll be populating the table with. So that one goes in first, and we want to defer it. So after the source attribute and its value, we'll type in just the defer keyword. And then underneath of that one is where we'll go ahead and add our LHT_table.js file. I can't seem to hit that here this morning. There we go. And then again, after the source attribute or the value, we'll put in the defer attribute. So a couple of things here. First of all, let's scroll down in the HTML file and see, just like we did in the tutorial. Actually, I guess we're adding that. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to have to add in here. I think it's right down after this article here. We have to add a div with an ID value that we're going to target our JavaScript. So let's go to step 3. Yeah, here we go. Step 3, scrolling down directly after the closing article tag, insert a div and ID it as camel cased event list. So let's do that back here in the HTML, right after the closing article, do an opening div tag, and then ID that as event, capital L, list, and then close it. So we're not going to type anything in there, obviously. That's just, again, the element that we'll be targeting with the JavaScript. We'll build the table in the JavaScript and then replace the inner HTML of that div element with the JavaScript code, or the results of running, actually, our JavaScript code. Okay, so we're going to save that, Control S. The other thing that we need to do here too, let's see if it's in the instructions. I think it was actually in a previous instruction there that they just want us to look at the contents there of our LHT list.js file. So I'm going over my Solution Explorer. I'm just going to double click, open it up so we can see what's there. And you can see it's 3 arrays, one called event dates, one called event descriptions, and the other one's event prices. So same number of elements in both arrays. So as we go through here building our table, we'll grab for the first event, the first element's value as far as the date, and then we'll get the first value from here for the description, and then we get the first value here for the price, and then we'll just obviously have loops that process through each of these for each of the events we put into the table. So step 4 now, we're going to the LHT table.js file. And below the comment section now, we want to declare a variable named this day and have it contain this hard-coded date in there. So we're basically creating a new date object there, and we're going to populate it with that date. So back into our editor inside of the LHT_table.js file. Underneath of the comment there, we'll actually add a new comment first that reads set the date of the display that will be displayed in the calendar. And then we just created a new variable, this day, assigned it a new date object, and we pass it in a hard-coded date value to it of August 30th, 2018. Save your work as you go, Control S. So step 5 now that we're at. So we're going to create a variable named table HTML. That's also camel case, but notice the camel casing in here is when we're using the acronym HTML, they just capitalize it completely. So table HTML, that's going to be the variable. And what we want to do then is add this text to it that we see here, which you can see is starting to set up the table. You have an ID of event table. It adds the caption, upcoming events, and then starts the first row and creates, or it doesn't start it, it actually does the entire first row there, creates a TH for each of the row titles, so date, event, and then price. So we'll also write a comment for it as well. And I should point out that when we see the instruction written out this way, that they're not asking us to do this all in one statement. So what we want to do is just break it down line by line, just like we did in the tutorial. So initially what we want to do is we'll have table HTML assign that string value, which is the opening table with its ID in there. And then we'll create another statement where we use the plus equals operator so that we can continue to add to then the table HTML variable. And so then we'll add the second line in there as a string value, and then again a new statement that will allow us to again append to the table HTML variable, and that'll be the third line there where we create the TR and the THs with all the labels for each column. So the comment reads, write the HTML code for the event list table. So just going right below where we were there, write the comment, which reads, write the HTML code for the event list table, and then go ahead and type in the actual variable name, table HTML. Again, remember to make it all caps for when you type out the HTML, and then just assign it that first line of code that was in the instruction there, the one that created the opening table tag with the ID equal to the event table. And remember, this is a string, so when we're doing the assignment here on the right, we are having to put it inside of double quotes, and then internally, because our ID value needs to be identified as a string as well, we need to switch the style of quotes. So if we've got outer quotes or double quotes, and we need to use quotes internally, we have to switch to single quotes. And you could reverse that completely. You could have single quotes around the whole string structure and use double quotes internally. So you just have to know that it's always the opposite of whatever you have in the outer quotes are, whatever their style is, the inner quotes need to be the opposite. Otherwise, if you think about it, just if I were to put a double quote in here, that's going to tell the compiler or the interpreter, hey, that's where the end of the string is right there. So we can't do that. We have to use the alternative, the single quote. So now we're going to append, add to that existing variable, the table HTML variable, with the second bit of code that we saw there in the instructions. So we start out with the variable that we just declared and initialized here above. We're just repeating that same variable name here, but now we're using the plus equals operator, meaning take what's already in the table HTML variable and add to it. So this time we're adding, again, as a string value, the opening caption tag, and then the actual text that'll display in the caption, which reads upcoming events, and then the close caption tag. Remember to save your work as you go, Control S.
On table HTML,
The first one or the second one?
The second one. Is that a plus sign?
Line 19, okay.
Yeah, is that a plus sign with equal?
The plus sign is followed by equals. That's the plus equal operator, and that tells the interpreter, take the current value that we wrote in line 18 and assign to the table HTML variable, keep that value in there, now just add to it with this additional string information that we're putting in there to the right of it.
Right.
So plus equals just means keep the original value that's in the variable and just add to it with this new information.
Sorry, it's just hard to tell.
Oh, let me blow that up for you then. I can't accommodate you. I'll bill you for it, but I'll accommodate you.
Right. Thank you.
We can move on now to the next step, which is just adding that third line that we saw in the instructions, again, appending it to that original table HTML variable. So again, it's table HTML and plus equals as your operator. At this time, the string value is going to be the code that actually starts the first row and then adds each of the table headings that represent the values that'll be in each column. So the first one's the date inside of a TH, and then the event inside of a TH, the price inside of the TH, and then the ending row tag. So it's step 6 now. Lewis is our client, so they want the page to list the events that are occurring within 14 days after the current event. So that's why we're using their hard-coded value, because the table or the JavaScript file they give us has dates that are related to that hard-coded date. So we're going to declare a variable now named endDate. And what we'll assign to that will be another date object, but that's going to be whatever the current day that we've got set up plus 14 days. And that's the value of this day, get time, and then basically going through and doing that whole mathematical, because you got to remember time, date and time is always in milliseconds, right? So we have to do the math involved there. So we'll multiply 14, which is the number of days, times 24, number of hours in the day, and then times 60, the number of minutes in an hour, and 60 again, the number of seconds in a minute, and then 1,000, the number of milliseconds in a second. We'll also add a comment here that reads, set the end date for the event list 2 weeks from the current date. And these comments aren't something that you're being graded on. It's just that they include them, and I just encourage you to add comments because it is good practice, good coding practice. So that's what that one looks like there. So you got your comment, set the end date for the event list 2 weeks from the current date. Here we're initializing a new variable. So we use the keyword var. The name of it's going to be endDate, camel cased, equal to, and then a new date object. And then notice here, what we're doing is we're passing that date that we have up here, and then using the getTime method, we can just add to it 14 days. And that's the math for the 14 days. So this day get time, that's what time it is, you know, right as soon as the user views it, and then add 14 days to that. Actually, it's not the time when they use it, is it? Yeah, no, it's still from this day. So it's always going to be based on this hard-coded date because, again, we have to use their date because that's the way their JavaScript file that has all the events is set up is based on that date. But if you're doing this, you know, for reals, you would get rid of that date value up there, and then it would always be whatever the current time is down here. Remember to save it as you go, Control S. In step 7 now, I'm going to create a for loop, and that's going to loop through the length of our event dates array. And they just tell us we don't want to use I, which is normally what we're going to use there as our counter variable. So the event dates, going back here into Visual Studio, just reminding you here on this list, that's what they're referring to now, is this variable, this array here, that's been identified as event dates. So just right underneath the last block of code, we'll add a comment to identify what we're going to do here. So we want to loop through then that array. And then within the for loop, we'll declare a variable that's named event date. That'll contain the date object that has the date stored in the whatever the value of I is in our loop at that time, that many days away. Declare the variable event day. So that's going to actually grab from the second array there. We're going to convert to the toDate string because that's going to be the actual date that shows up there. And then we have the event time, and that one we want to convert to the locale time string. So wherever they're viewing it at, you know, it displays it properly. And then the final thing is insert the if statement. That'll have a conditional expression that'll test whether or not this day is less than or equal to our event date. And also, so we'll have a conditional operator there that also checks to see if our event date is less than or equal to the end date. And so if so, the event will fall within the 2-week window that they've requested. And so we will go ahead and write out that information using an open table row. And then we'll have 3 cells. Every time that we create a table row, the first one's going to pull in the event day, the second one pulls in the description, and the third one pulls in the price. So we'll start here with step A. Well, actually, we should let's go back here and finish up with creating the for loop first, and then we'll populate the for loop as we go. Okay, so right underneath the comment there, go ahead and start a new for loop. In the parentheses there, we'll go ahead and create a var I, make it equal to 0. And we'll want this to run then as long as I is less than our event dates variables length, which is typical. You know, anytime you're processing an array, that's usually how the termination value is going to be set up. It'll always be just less than the length because it's 0 based. So the length always represents 1 more than there's actually, you know, the numbered elements in there. So that's why we always just make it less than the date of the array. And then of course we want to increment that I each time we go through our for loop. And then for the statement blocks that'll actually activate in the for loop, we'll create curly braces and we'll populate then in between those curly braces. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll go back and start adding each of the components there that need to be in our for loop. So in the for loop, declare a variable event date. And that's going to contain the date object stored in the, again, the current position of I, or the current value of I within the actual array. So I starts out as 0, so that means in the events date array, we're going to grab the very first value. So let's go back to Visual Studio and just remind you, here's the list again. So that just means that statement that we need to create is the one that's going to say, go to event dates, brackets, current value of I, and when I is 0, it'll grab this value. And then we'll go through the loop back around, then I increments to 1, then we'll grab this date, on and on as we go through the entire array. So we're establishing here a new variable called event, capital D, date, and that's equal to a new date object when we pass to it the event, capital D, dates, and then the current element, which will be determined by wherever I is in the for loop at that point. And that's a single statement, end it with a semicolon. So if you were to run that right now, we're not outputting anything at this point, but basically that variable event date would just go through that array until it reached the end of the array, and it would populate with each of the individual dates, again, based on I, indicating which date we're pulling out of there at any given time. So back to the instructions now. The next one is to declare a variable event day, and it'll store the text from the event date using the toDate string method to do the conversion. So that's just simply going to be a var event day equals, and then we're grabbing the value that we have up here, event date, and converting it to a date string. So basically right here, you can see we're putting in the day as well as the date and the time, and then the value. Let's go back to the JavaScript. Yeah, so this is the actual date that we're pulling in, and we need to convert it then to that other format. Okay, I'll assume you have that typed in. We'll go back to our instructions. And so now we're looking at 8C, declaring a variable named event time that stores the text of the event date time, and then in the format using the method toLocale time string. So it'll display correctly for wherever we're viewing it from. So that's a variable event time. That's going to be equal to our event date dot toLocale time string. So if you think about it, the date's really kind of the critical component in this particular assignment because everything's going to be based on that date. Now we're down to 8D, where they want us within our for loop there to insert an if statement that has a conditional expression that tests whether this day is lesser than or equal to the event date, and we need to also evaluate the event date to make sure that we're less than the end date. So if both of those return true, then we can go ahead and add a new row in there and actually put all the values in. If it's not true, we basically just want to skip it then at that point and then go back to the for loop, return back to the for loop. So let's start with the if header here. So it's going to be if, in parentheses, this capital D day is less than or equal to our event capital D date, and then the conditional operator, so 2 ampersands, saying both of these conditions need to evaluate to true. And so after the 2 ampersands, we're checking now to see if the event date is less than or equal to our end date. And then curly braces for the statements that we actually want to apply if both of those conditions evaluate the true. If you look at it, what they're trying to do there is really just essentially checking the date. And then, you know, if it's the same day that's the last day, which is the, you know, the last day that's listed within the array there, then it's also checking to make sure that we're not beyond the time frame that's listed there. But the main thing would be that this day less than or equal to event date. We don't want to display anything beyond that. Okay, so I'll assume that you have that all typed in. Let's go back and take a look at the instructions here. And this is similar to what I was saying up above here. You know, when they gave us the instruction here that they want us to create an opening table and then the caption and then the table row and the table header. So this is basically the same thing. We want to start by just creating the TR tag, and then we'll create a statement for each one of the TDs. And then we'll have a last statement that'll actually be the closing TR tag. So all of that needs to be inside of the if, because we don't want to create the row. We don't want to create the cells with the information in them, you know, if we are outside of our event date, which actually would crash the program probably if we got beyond the event date, because we'd be outside of the array. So first thing is just we want to add a table row into, and remember where we're actually building all of this is inside of our table HTML variable, right? So we've already got that opening table, we've already got the caption, we've already got the header row with the header elements in there. So now we just want to add to that inside of our if. So each time that we go here, just you're going to retype that variable again using the plus equals operator. And in the first part of the instruction, all we're doing is just creating a new row. So in quotes, in angle brackets, TR. And then end the statement with your semi. So that begins the first row that'll have actual detailed information in it. Now the next thing would be to grab the event day, and using concatenation in this case, they're going to combine that with a string value of the @ symbol. If you look back at the table example again, you'll see it's the day, @ and then the event time. So all that is going to go into the first cell in this row here. So again, we're just appending to our existing table HTML variable with the plus equals. And this time now we need to concatenate because we're going to combine both the elements, which are always string values. So we're going to have an opening TD here. We want to combine that then with the actual value of event day. So we need to go outside of the string, use the concatenate operator, which when we're working with strings, it's the plus symbol. And then just simply call up the value from the variable event day. Then we want to concatenate to that, inside of quotes, a space followed by the @ symbol, followed by another space. And then we want to concatenate to that, so another plus symbol, the value for the event time variable. And then add to that the closing TD. And then again, end it with a semi because it's a single statement. So now we're actually grabbing a value from both event day variable and event time variable, and now we're actually going to display those values inside that first cell of that first row underneath of our header. And of course, as we go through the for loop, it'll be the first row the first time through, and the second row the next time through, and on and on. Which is a point I should make here is, I mean, notice, you know, we didn't want to have this information here repeated over and over again. So that gets all created outside of your for loop. But inside of the for loop, we want to take those 3 arrays and each time grab the appropriate value from them and display it in our table. And so all of that is inside of the for loop because we're doing the same steps over and over again as we grab each of the values from those arrays. Okay, so continuing on now, underneath of the previous appending to our table HTML, we now want to add another cell in that row and concatenate to that the value, the current value in the array that'll display the event descriptions. So again, we're always just adding to our table HTML variable with the plus equals. Oops, I got caps lock on. Fat fingers, we call that. All right, there we go. Plus equals, and then in quotes, new TD. So opening up a new cell in the same row there. And then we want to append to that, so using our concatenate operator, the value of event descriptions, event capital D.
Oh, you typed
descriptions.
HMMTL.
Say what?
You typed in HMTL instead of HTML in line 34.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so appending to that, an opening TD plus the event descriptions value. And then we'll just close up that TD. And then end the statement with a semi. So that's our second column that has the description in it now. Save your work as you go, Control S. Okay, I'll assume you have that line typed out. We need to add the last cell here now. So again, we want to do our table HTML, make it plus equals, again, to another string value that's an opening TD. Got the wrong quotes there. Where'd that come from? There we go. So TD, then append to that, concatenate to that. This time, the event prices array at the current value of I. And then we just want to close it up. So we'll concatenate a string value of a closing TD to do just that. And the statement with the semicolon. So you look at it, we got the opening table row. We added the first cell and populated it with the event day at event time. Then we created the second cell that has the description, the current description. Actually, no, that's not the current description. That was my mistake. We want to identify the current description using the current value of I in our for loop, because that, remember, event description also an array. We don't have to do that for our event day and event time because we'd already taken care of that up here. But for the other two arrays, we have to actually identify that we need to have a specific element from that array that corresponds with the date and time that we established up above. Okay, so the last thing we need to do here is just close up our row. So again, we'll use our table HTML variable. We'll append to it using the plus equals operator, and then in quotes, just a closing TR tag. End it with the semicolon to end the statement. So once you have it all typed out, just go back up and kind of follow the code down starting at line 18 there. And just recall that the first thing we did is create a opening table element, add a caption, and add a row with the header values. Then we went down into the for loop and created the values for the event day and the event time. And then we used those down in the if block where we opened up a new table row, and in the first cell, we put in the day and the time. Then we added to that, we added a new cell, same row, that contains the event description for the current value of I. And then we added another cell with the current value of event prices in it. Then we closed up the row. So the last thing that we need to do here is to close up the table, but we don't want to do that in the for loop or in the if clause here, because the table was opened up outside of all of this. So we wouldn't auto, we wouldn't want to, after we created a row, for instance, end the table because we're going to have multiple rows. And so we want to go outside of both the if clause there and the for loop. So after your last closing curly that you see there on the screen, that's where we want to add the final appending here to our table HTML variable. And it's going to be plus equals, in quotes, a closing table tag. So at that point in time now, that table HTML, that should contain the entire table with all of the events, descriptions, and prices in, each row for each individual event. But realize that's all in memory at this point, right? So let's go back here. We just did step 9 after the for loop, added the closing table there. Step 10 now, we're going to insert the value of our variable, table HTML, actually into the HTML page for that div that we created earlier, which is ID'd as event list. So we're going to want to create a comment for that. So I'll just go right here underneath of my closing table statement. The comment reads, write the HTML code into the event capital L list box. Okay, so just a comment of what the next statement's going to be. My question to you is, what's that statement going to be? How do we target and replace the value that's in the event list div? No takers?
You use the document get element by ID.
Excellent. So first we have to target the element in the HTML page, and that's exactly right. So that means we're going to use document dot get element by ID, and then in the parentheses for document get element by ID, what's the value that we're targeting? What is it we're looking for in that? What's the ID value that we're looking for in our HTML document?
The event list.
Right. So inside of the parentheses, inside of quotes, we'll have event list. That's the element we want to target. And then we want to change the contents of that element. So what's the property we want to use? Once we've identified the element, then we need to add a property in there that will allow us to change its contents.
To
Anybody
the
remember?
table, right?
What's that? Yeah. Well, we're going to take table HTML and assign it to what property of the event list?
I'm lost in that one. I don't know.
Okay. Well, inner HTML is the property that generally we use. You might recall, I think it was when we were doing in the HTML class, I think it was, when we were building the form, we used the value property.
Mm-hmm.
But the nice thing about inner HTML is it allows you to replace all of the contents, whether it's HTML or just straight out text, whatever's inside of that element, it'll replace it all. Ours is empty, but if there was something in there, it would replace everything. So let's go ahead and type that out then. Document dot get capital E element, capital B by, capital I D, and then in the parentheses, in quotes, we want to identify the ID value, which is event list, and then dot to target the inner HTML property. You want to assign to it then our table HTML variables contents. So I got a typo there. Document. There we go. Document get element by ID event list dot inner HTML equals the contents of table HTML. So make sure you save your work once you have that all typed in. Control S. And that's should be everything at this point. So let's go ahead and run our LHT underscore events.html file in the browser. And must have a typo somewhere. So let's do an F12. Let's look at console. There we go. So on line 34, event description is not defined. So actually that's the only error. So let's go back here, line 34, right here. I think it's plural descriptions. Let's go back and look. Event dates, event descriptions, event prices. Yeah, so that's what the problem is. So it's event descriptions. So what was happening there, you know, I went to look for this array in the JavaScript file, actually in memory, because, you know, if you think about it, what happens here, if we go back up to the top, so all of that, those array and all its information, they're all being loaded into memory at this point here. And so that's actually what is happening is now we're looking in memory. This other code here, our LHT table code, is saying go into memory, look for this variable in its name, or in this case, the array name, and it couldn't find it because I didn't type it out correctly. So that's why it just stopped and said, hey, wait a minute. All right, so let's save that. Let's go back and run the HTML again in the browser. Where's my browser? There we go. That looks a little bit better. So all the styling, everything was already done for us. So really what we did is we just added a new table in here. We put in the headers of date, event, and price, and then we went in and used their array values and just populated each of those rows.